"You're just a waitress," he said, not looking up, and 5 minutes later, no one at the table could find a single word to say. The glass in his hand caught the soft amber light, expensive whiskey swirling with the kind of confidence money tends to buy, and Daniel Whitmore wore that confidence like a tailored suit, effortless, unshaken, absolute. Around him, conversations lowered without instruction, waiters moved faster without being asked, and even the manager stood straighter when he walked in, because men like Daniel didn't enter rooms, they shifted them. Emily Carter noticed all of it, the way she always did, not with curiosity, but with quiet awareness, the kind that didn't need to prove itself to exist. She had been on her feet for 6 hours already, black flats pressing into polished hardwood, a tray balanced in one hand, her posture steady, her expression neutral, not cold, not warm, just present. When she approached his table, he didn't look at her, not at first, his eyes fixed on his phone, thumb scrolling through numbers that could change lives in seconds, while she stood there, waiting, not impatient, not eager, just still. "Sparkling water," he said, as if the air itself would carry the order to her, and for a moment, nothing else existed in his world beyond that screen. Emily nodded once, the movement small, almost invisible, and turned away without a word, her pace measured, her steps quiet, as if she understood something the room didn't. When she returned, placing the glass precisely at the edge of his reach, he finally glanced up, just briefly, just enough to register her presence. And something in that glance lingered half a second longer than expected, like a thought that almost formed but didn't. He set his phone down, tapping the rim of the glass with one finger, then leaned back slightly, studying her now, not fully, but enough to speak. "Tell me something," he said, a faint smile curling at the edge of his mouth, the kind that came before a game he already believed he'd won. Emily waited. "What do you think a man like me does?" he asked, his tone light, almost amused, but underneath it, there was something sharper, something testing. She didn't answer immediately, not because she didn't know, but because she didn't rush. Her eyes moved once, briefly, to the watch on his wrist, then to the untouched menu, then back to him. "You make decisions," she said quietly, her voice even, unshaken, "that other people have to live with." The smile paused, just for a second. Then it returned, a little tighter now. "And you?" he asked. "You carry plates." It wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel in volume. But it landed exactly where it was meant to. A few people nearby glanced over, sensing the shift without understanding it, like a change in pressure before a storm. Emily didn't move, didn't react. Her hand remained steady on the edge of the table, her shoulders relaxed, her gaze level, not challenging, not submissive. Just there. "You're just a waitress," Daniel added, this time looking directly at her, as if sealing the statement into something permanent. The room seemed to narrow around that sentence, conversations thinning, time stretching just enough to notice. Emily blinked once. Then she reached for the small leather folder on the table, the one he hadn't opened yet, and gently turned it toward him. "Then you might want to look at page 3 before you sign anything tonight," she said, just as calmly as before. No edge, no emphasis, just a sentence placed exactly where it needed to be. And for the first time since he sat down, Daniel Whitmore didn't speak. Daniel did not reach for the folder immediately. He looked at her first, really looked this time, as if recalibrating something he had already decided, his fingers resting lightly against the edge of the table, the confidence still there, but now edged with something quieter, something more careful. "Page 3, he repeated, slower, as though testing the weight of the words. Then he let out a small breath and flipped the folder open with one hand, casual, almost dismissive, but not quite. The ambient noise of the restaurant returned in fragments, the soft clink of glass, the low hum of conversations, yet something at that table remained suspended, like a moment that had not finished unfolding. Emily had already stepped back, not far, just enough to give space, her posture unchanged, her attention already shifting to the next table, as if nothing unusual had occurred, as if she had not just interrupted the rhythm of a man who rarely experienced interruption. Daniel's eyes scanned the first page quickly, then the second, the practiced efficiency of someone used to processing information at speed, but when he reached the third, his movement slowed, not dramatically, just enough to notice if you were watching closely. His thumb paused at the corner. His gaze narrowed slightly. There, buried in the language of polished agreements and carefully constructed clauses, was a number that did not align, a percentage that shifted the balance of the deal just enough to matter, not obvious, not careless, but deliberate in a way that required attention to catch. He leaned forward, bringing the page closer, reading again, this time not as a formality, but as a question. Around him, his associates continued their quiet discussions, unaware, confident in the assumption that everything had already been handled, that men like Daniel did not miss details. But Daniel knew better than to trust assumptions, especially his own. He lifted his head slightly, eyes flicking toward Emily, who was now placing a plate down at another table, her movements smooth, unhurried, as though she had not just redirected a transaction worth more than most people would see in a lifetime. "Excuse me," he said, not loudly, but enough that it carried. She turned, not immediately, but without delay, walking back with the same steady pace, stopping at the edge of his table, waiting. "What exactly am I looking at?" he asked, and the tone had changed, not softer, not warmer, but stripped of something it had carried before. She did not lean in. She did not reach for the folder. Her eyes moved once to the page, then back to him. "The amendment at the bottom," she said, her voice even. "The wording shifts the equity distribution after the second quarter. It looks standard, but it is not." He followed her words, tracing the line again, and this time he saw it clearly, the subtle phrasing that redefined control without ever stating it outright, the kind of detail that would pass through a dozen hands unnoticed if no one was looking for it. Daniel sat back slowly, the leather chair barely making a sound, and for a moment, he did not speak. Not because he did not have something to say, but because he was measuring something new, something that had not been part of the equation 5 minutes ago. "And you caught that," he said finally, not as a question, but not quite a statement either. Emily's expression did not change. "You asked what I do," she replied, the same calm, the same stillness. "I pay attention." The words settled between them, simple, unadorned, and for the first time that evening, Daniel Whitmore had nothing immediate to place on top of them. The silence did not break all at once. It shifted, slowly, like a room adjusting to a change in temperature that no one could quite explain. Daniel's fingers closed the folder with a soft, deliberate motion, the kind that suggested a decision had been made, even if it had not yet been spoken. Across the table, one of his associates leaned in slightly, noticing the pause. "Everything good?" he asked, his tone casual, confident in the assumption that it was. Daniel did not answer immediately. His eyes remained on Emily, not with curiosity now, but with focus, the kind he reserved for variables that did not behave as expected. "We need to revisit the amendment on page 3, he said finally, his voice calm, but carrying enough weight to redirect the entire table. The associate frowned, flipping through his own copy, scanning quickly, then again, slower this time. "I do not see anything unusual," he replied, a hint of uncertainty slipping in. Daniel reached forward, tapping the exact line Emily had pointed out, not forcefully, just enough to guide attention. "Look again," he said, and this time they did. One by one, the men at the table leaned in, the quiet confidence in their posture giving way to something more attentive, more careful, as the realization moved through them in stages, first doubt, then recognition, then a subtle shift in expression that no one announced, but everyone felt. The deal had not changed. The room had. Emily did not stay to watch it unfold. She turned, as she always did, moving back into the rhythm of the restaurant, refilling a glass here, clearing a plate there, her presence folding back into the background with practiced ease. But Daniel did not return to the conversation the same way. He listened now, not just to the words being said, but to the spaces between them, the assumptions, the details that had been overlooked, and every few seconds, his attention drifted, not to the documents, not to his associates, but to her. It was not distraction. It was recalibration. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. The conversation at the table grew more measured, more precise, the kind that happens when certainty is replaced by awareness. Finally, Daniel closed his folder again, this time with finality, and stood, the movement subtle but immediate enough to signal a shift. "Give me a minute," he said, already stepping away before anyone could respond. He crossed the room without hesitation, the soft carpet muting his steps, his presence parting the space around him as it always did, until he reached the service station where Emily was aligning a row of glasses with quiet precision. She did not look up right away, not out of defiance, not out of indifference, but because she finished what she was doing first. Then she met his gaze. "You saw that in under 30 seconds, he said, not accusing, not impressed, just stating a fact that no longer fit neatly into the category he had assigned her. Emily picked up a cloth, wiping the edge of one glass that was already clean. It was not hidden, she said. It was just not where anyone thought to look. Daniel studied her for a moment, the noise of the restaurant fading again, not because it had quieted, but because his attention had narrowed. Where did you learn to read contracts like that? He asked. It was a direct question. Clear. Precise. The kind he was used to getting answers to. Emily folded the cloth once, then set it down. I read what is in front of me, she replied. No explanation. No defense. Just a boundary, placed as calmly as everything else she had done. And for the second time that night, Daniel Whitmore found himself standing in front of someone who did not need to prove anything to him. And for the first time in a long time, he did not try to make them. Daniel did not move right away. For a man who was used to motion, to decisions made in seconds and executed without hesitation, the stillness felt unfamiliar, not uncomfortable, but different, like standing in a space where the rules had quietly shifted without announcement. Around them, the restaurant continued as if nothing had changed. Silverware touched porcelain. Low conversations rose and fell, and somewhere near the entrance, a quiet laugh carried just long enough to fade into the background. Emily reached for another glass, aligning it with the others, her movements precise, consistent, unhurried, as though time moved at a different pace where she stood. You read what is in front of you, Daniel repeated, not mocking, not questioning, but testing the simplicity of it against everything he knew. Most people had the same thing in front of them, he added. They missed it. Emily did not look at him this time. Most people look for confirmation, she said, not truth. The words landed without force, but they did not need it. Daniel let out a quiet breath, something close to a laugh, but without humor, more recognition than amusement. He glanced back toward his table, where the discussion had shifted into something more cautious, more deliberate, his absence noted but not questioned. He turned back to her. Do you always do that? He asked. Step in when no one asks you to? Emily paused, just for a second, the cloth in her hand resting against the rim of the glass. Then she set it down. Only when something important is about to be missed, she said. There was no pride in it. No justification. Just a statement that did not ask to be agreed with. Daniel studied her again, but this time not as a puzzle to solve or a variable to control, but as something he had not categorized correctly the first time. You could have said nothing, he said. Let it go through. It would not have affected you. Emily finally met his eyes, and for a moment, the distance between them felt smaller, not physically, but in a way that had nothing to do with space. It would have, she said, just not immediately. Daniel held that answer for a second longer than expected, then nodded once, slowly, as if accepting a premise he had not considered before. He reached into his jacket, pulling out a sleek card, the kind that opened doors before it was even read, and placed it on the counter between them. If you ever decide you want to do something else, he said, his tone even, measured, call me. It was not an offer he made lightly, and it was not one that was usually refused. Emily glanced at the card, then back at him, her expression unchanged. She did not reach for it. Not immediately, not eagerly, just a brief look, as if acknowledging its existence without assigning it value. I already do something, she said quietly. The air between them shifted again, softer this time, but no less clear. Daniel's hand remained on the counter for a moment. Then he withdrew it, not offended, not surprised, but aware, perhaps for the first time in a long time, that not everything in front of him was meant to be taken, managed, or moved. He nodded once more, smaller now, almost to himself, then turned, walking back toward his table with the same composed stride, but not the same certainty. Behind him, Emily picked up the card, not to keep, not to examine, but simply to move it aside, placing it neatly at the edge of the counter, aligned with everything else, before returning to her work as if nothing at all had happened. The conversation at the table did not return to what it had been. It moved forward. Technically, numbers were discussed, terms were adjusted, voices remained controlled, but something underneath it had shifted, something less visible but more significant, like a foundation that had been quietly re-examined. Daniel listened more than he spoke now, his gaze occasionally drifting to the edge of the room where Emily moved through her tasks with the same quiet precision, untouched by the gravity that usually followed him. One of his partners leaned closer, lowering his voice. "We can renegotiate the clause," he said. "It is minor. We still have leverage." Daniel did not respond right away. He looked at the page again, then closed the folder with a soft, decisive motion. "No," he said. "We do it clean." The word landed with more weight than the others. Clean meant no hidden advantages, no quiet shifts, no assumptions left unexamined. Around the table, there was a brief pause, not resistance, but recalculation, as if they were adjusting to a version of Daniel they had not fully seen before. The meeting concluded shortly after, not with the usual sense of victory, but with something steadier, something closer to clarity. Chairs moved back. Jackets were adjusted. Hands were shaken. And as the group began to disperse, Daniel remained seated for a moment longer, his attention no longer on the documents, but on the small details around him, the things he had not noticed before. The way the light reflected off the glassware, the quiet coordination between staff, the rhythm of a place that functioned without needing to be seen. He stood, smoothing his jacket, and reached for the check before anyone else could, a habit more than a gesture. When Emily approached, placing the leather folder gently at the edge of the table, their eyes met again, not as strangers now, but not as equals either, something more undefined, something still forming. He opened the folder, glanced at the total, then took out a pen, writing a number that exceeded expectation without hesitation, the motion smooth, practiced, familiar. He slid it back toward her. "For your time," he said, his tone neutral, but intentional. Emily looked at the receipt, then at him, her expression unchanged, but her hand did not move to take it. "That was not part of the service," she said. Daniel tilted his head slightly, not annoyed, but curious again. "It is appreciation," he replied, "for something that could have cost me a lot more." Emily's fingers rested lightly on the edge of the table, not accepting, not rejecting, just present. "Then you already received what you needed," she said. The simplicity of it made the moment stretch again, not tense, not uncomfortable, just clear in a way that did not require explanation. Daniel leaned back slightly, studying her, the pen still in his hand, and used for the first time in a long while. "You do not. Make this easy," he said. It was not a complaint. It was an observation. Emily allowed the smallest hint of a smile, not warm, not distant, just real enough to exist. "It is not supposed to be easy," she replied. "It is supposed to be right." The words settled between them, quiet but complete, and for a moment, Daniel Whitmore understood something he had spent years overlooking. That value was not always something you could assign, negotiate, or increase with numbers. Sometimes it was something you either recognized or you missed entirely. Daniel did not insist again. He looked at the receipt one last time, then closed the folder without adding anything further, the pen resting still in his hand before he set it down beside the glass. For a man who built his world on leverage, it was an unfamiliar choice, to leave something unresolved, to accept that not everything required a transaction. He stood slowly, adjusting his jacket, but this time his movements carried less certainty and more intention, as if each action was being considered rather than assumed. Around him, the restaurant continued its quiet rhythm, but he no longer moved through it the same way. People still noticed him, still made space, still watched, but he was no longer responding to that attention. His focus had narrowed to something smaller, quieter, harder to define. He took a step away from the table, then paused, just briefly, before turning back toward the service station. Emily was there again, reorganizing a stack of menus, aligning their edges with careful precision, her world contained, ordered, unaffected by the shifts that followed him. "Emily," he said, her name deliberate this time, not as a label, but as recognition. She looked up, meeting his gaze with the same calm presence she had carried all evening. "Yes," she replied. No title, no distance, just acknowledgement. He hesitated, not because he lacked words, but because the ones he usually relied on did not fit here. Earlier, he said, I made an assumption. The sentence hung there, incomplete, but intentional. Emily did not rush to fill the space. She simply waited. Daniel let out a quiet breath, something closer to honesty than he was used to offering. I was wrong, he said. The words were simple, but they carried weight precisely because he did not soften them, did not redirect them, did not wrap them in explanation. Emily held his gaze for a moment, then gave a small nod, not accepting an apology, not rejecting it, just acknowledging that it had been said. That happens, she replied. There was no triumph in her voice, no satisfaction, just truth, stated without decoration. Daniel almost smiled, not out of amusement, but out of recognition, the kind that comes when something finally aligns. He glanced at the counter, noticing the business card he had left earlier, now placed neatly to the side, untouched in any meaningful way. You did not call, he said, more to himself than to her. Emily followed his gaze briefly, then returned to him. I did not need to, she answered. Another pause, not empty, just full in a way that did not require more words. Daniel reached for the card, turning it once between his fingers, then placed it back down exactly where it had been, aligning it with the edge as she had done before. A small detail, but intentional. If you ever change your mind, he said, not offering, not persuading, just leaving the possibility where it was. Emily picked up one of the menus, smoothing its surface with her hand. If I do, she said, it will not be because of what you can offer. Daniel nodded slowly, accepting that boundary without question, without negotiation. For the first time that evening, there was nothing left for him to adjust, nothing to improve, nothing to control. Just a moment, clear and complete. He stepped back, giving space where he once would have taken it, then turned and walked toward the exit, the sound of his footsteps soft against the floor, blending into the quiet rhythm of the room. And behind him, Emily returned to her work, the same steady pace, the same quiet precision, as if nothing had changed, even though everything had. The night air outside was cooler than Daniel expected, carrying a quiet edge that did not belong to the controlled environment he had just left behind. The city moved as it always did, steady, indifferent headlights, sliding across wet pavement, distant conversations blending into the hum of traffic. But for the first time in a long while, he did not reach for his phone, did not check the time, did not move with purpose toward the next thing waiting for him. He stood there for a moment, just outside the restaurant, his reflection faint in the glass behind him, as if he needed to see something differently before stepping away. Inside, Emily continued her shift, the rhythm unchanged, tables turning, orders moving, small details handled with the same quiet precision that had gone unnoticed by most, but not by him anymore. She did not look toward the door when it closed. She did not follow his departure with her eyes. Because to her, nothing had ended. It had simply been another moment that passed, like all the others. 15 minutes later, a new table filled, laughter rising, menus opening, and Emily approached with the same steady presence, her voice calm, her posture composed, her attention complete, as if each interaction deserved its own space, untouched by what came before. But something had shifted, not in what she did, but in how it was seen. A younger server nearby glanced at her, hesitating for a second before asking, "How did you know about that contract?" The question came quietly, almost cautiously, as if stepping into something she did not fully understand. Emily adjusted the position of a fork, aligning it with the edge of the napkin before answering. "I read it," she said. The server blinked, waiting for more, expecting more, but nothing else came. No explanation, no story, just the same simple truth. Across the room, the manager watched for a moment longer than usual, his expression thoughtful, not because he had witnessed the full exchange, but because he had felt the effect of it, the subtle change in the room, the way a single interaction had altered the tone of everything around it without raising a voice. And outside, Daniel finally moved, stepping away from the entrance, his pace slower than before, his mind not occupied with numbers or deals or schedules, but with something quieter, something that did not resolve as quickly as the problems he was used to solving. He replayed the moment in fragments, not the words, not the details, but the space between them, the pauses, the restraint, the absence of effort where he would have expected it. She had not tried to impress him. She had not tried to prove anything. She had simply been right. And that more than anything else, unsettled the pattern he had relied on for years. He reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone, then stopped, the screen lighting briefly before going dark again as he lowered it. For once, there was no message to send, no instruction to give, no immediate action to take. Just a realization, quiet but persistent, that not everything valuable announces itself, and not everything important comes from where you expect it to. Back inside, Emily carried on, unnoticed again by most, her movements blending into the flow of the room, her presence steady, unchanged, but the standard had already been raised, not by what she said, not by what she showed, but by what she did not need to prove, and somewhere beyond the noise of the city, Daniel Whitmore understood, perhaps for the first time, that silence, when it comes from truth, does not weaken a moment, it defines it. The city did not change overnight, but something in the way Daniel moved through it did. The next morning arrived with the same glass towers catching early light, the same quiet efficiency of drivers and assistants and scheduled calls waiting to begin. Yet when he stepped into his office, the space felt different, not because it had changed, but because he had. His assistant greeted him with a stack of documents, already organized, already prioritized, each page representing decisions that would ripple far beyond the walls of that room. He took them, as he always did, but this time, he did not open them immediately. He set them down on the desk, aligning the edges without realizing it, mirroring a motion he had seen just hours before. A small detail, but not accidental. "Your 9 o'clock is ready," his assistant said. Daniel nodded, then paused, his gaze resting on the top document, not reading it, just looking, as if considering something beyond the numbers printed there. "Reschedule it," he said quietly. The assistant hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. "Reschedule," she repeated, not because she had not heard, but because it was not something he did. Daniel's eyes remained on the page. "Yes," he said. No explanation followed. And that was enough. The room adjusted. The schedule shifted. Somewhere, a meeting moved without question. He finally opened the document, reading the first page, then the second, and when he reached the third, he slowed, not because there was something wrong, but because he was no longer looking for confirmation. He was looking for truth. Minutes passed, then more. The silence in the office was different from the silence of the night before, but it carried the same weight, the same clarity that came from paying attention rather than assuming control. Across the city, Emily finished her shift, the early morning light filtering through the windows of the now quiet restaurant. Chairs stacked, tables cleared, the rhythm slowed to something softer. She moved through the space one last time, checking details no one would notice, aligning what needed to be aligned, leaving things better than she found them without needing anyone to acknowledge it. When she stepped outside, the air was cool, carrying the faint smell of rain and coffee from a nearby shop just opening for the day. She adjusted the strap of her bag over her shoulder and began to walk, her pace steady, her mind not replaying the night, not holding on to it, because to her, it had not been something to hold. It had simply been something she did. Back in his office, Daniel closed the folder in front of him, then reached for another, repeating the process, slower now, more deliberate, his attention anchored in a way it had not been before. The hours moved differently. Decisions were made, but not rushed. Conversations happened, but with more listening than speaking. And somewhere in between the numbers and the negotiations, something had shifted in a way that could not be measured, something that did not appear on balance sheets or reports, but influenced them all the same. By the time the afternoon light began to fade against the windows, Daniel leaned back. In his chair, his gaze drifting beyond the glass, not to the city below, but to a thought that had remained since the night before, quiet, persistent, unchanged. He reached for his phone, paused, then instead opened his drawer, taking out the business card he had almost forgotten he had retrieved. He looked at it for a moment, then turned it over, not expecting anything to be there, but noticing the blank space on the back, untouched, open, waiting. He set it down again, not to use, not yet, but not to dismiss either. And for the first time in a long time, Daniel Whitmore allowed something to remain unfinished, not because he could not complete it, but because he understood that some things were not meant to be controlled, only understood. The following evening arrived without announcement, just another shift, another sequence of small, precise moments unfolding in the same quiet rhythm. The restaurant filled gradually, the low hum of conversation returning, glasses catching the soft light, footsteps blending into the background, and Emily moved through it all with the same steady presence, unchanged, unaffected, as if the night before had left no trace at all. To her, it had not been something to revisit. It had simply been correct. At the far end of the room, the door opened again, not dramatically, not with the force of attention it once carried, but with a quieter entry, measured, almost deliberate. Daniel stepped inside, not scanning the room as he had before, not expecting the space to adjust around him, but observing it, noticing details he had overlooked, the coordination, the timing, the balance of something that worked without needing recognition. He did not walk to the same table immediately. He paused, just for a second, allowing the room to exist as it was before he entered it, then moved forward, choosing a table near the center, not isolated, not elevated, just present. When Emily approached, there was no hesitation in her steps, no change in her expression, just the same calm acknowledgement she offered every guest. "Good evening," she said. Daniel met her gaze, not with curiosity this time, not with evaluation, but with something simpler, something closer to understanding. "Good evening, Emily," he replied. Her name was not an advantage. It was recognition. She placed a glass of water on the table, the movement precise, familiar, then waited. "I would like to order," he said, then paused, a small shift, almost unnoticeable, "and I would like you to recommend something." It was not a test. It was not a challenge. It was a question, asked without expectation of control. Emily considered for a brief moment, not rushed, not performing, then nodded slightly. "The salmon," she said. "It is simple, but it is done right." Daniel nodded once. "Then I will have that." No adjustment, no negotiation, just acceptance. As she turned to place the order, the moment passed quietly, but something within it settled into place, something that did not need to be named to be understood. The meal arrived, and he ate without distraction, without checking his phone, without dividing his attention between the plate and the world outside it. Each detail held its place, not because it demanded it, but because he allowed it. When Emily returned with the check, she placed it on the table as she always did, without pause, without expectation. Daniel opened it, glanced at the total, then took out his card, placing it inside without writing anything extra, no excessive number, no attempt to assign value beyond what was already there. He closed the folder and handed it back. "Thank you," he said. The words were simple, but they were complete. Emily nodded once. "You are welcome." No more, no less. As he stood to leave, he paused again, just briefly, then looked at her. "You were right," he said. She did not ask about what. She did not need to. "That happens," she replied, the same calm truth as before. Daniel almost smiled, not because something was amusing, but because something had settled, something that no longer needed to be proven or corrected. He turned and walked toward the door, not as someone who had lost, not as someone who had won, but as someone who had understood. And behind him, Emily returned to her work, the same quiet rhythm, the same steady presence, unchanged, because she had never needed to change anything at all. Some people raise their voices to be heard. Others raise the standard, and the room listens without a word.